Everyone, there are moments in life when something within us begins to shift. It's not loud and it's not always obvious to others, but deep down we know something is changing. We start to see the world differently. We feel things more deeply. We begin to crave what's real, what's pure, what's eternal. That's not just personal growth, that's your soul rising. When your soul starts to rise, it doesn't mean everything around you is perfect. In fact, it often happens in the middle of pain, confusion, or transition. But even in the middle of all that, you start to sense something higher taking shape. You're no longer pulled by the noise of the world. You're drawn by the quiet voice of God within. This rising doesn't look the same for everyone, but there are signs, subtle, powerful signs that your soul is being elevated, called upward to live with more purpose, more truth, and more peace. Today, I want to walk you through 5 of those signs, not just so you can recognize them, but so you can embrace them and trust what God is doing inside of you. One of the first signs that your soul is rising, truly beginning to evolve beyond surface level living, is that you start to experience peace even when the external circumstances around you haven't changed. It's a kind of peace that's difficult to explain in ordinary language because it doesn't come from comfort, safety, or predictability. It comes from alignment, not alignment with your environment, but alignment with truth, with something greater than your own ego. In psychology, we often speak about the difference between external regulation and internal regulation. Most people spend their entire lives trying to manage the outer world, chasing control, approval, validation, money, success, anything that can give them a sense of stability. But what they're really doing is trying to avoid uncertainty. The problem is, uncertainty is unavoidable. The world is chaotic by nature. No amount of control ever really makes it safe. So when a person begins to find peace not from what they control, but from what they accept, you know something deeper is happening. That's the soul rising, and you can spot it when someone stops reacting out of panic and starts responding out of clarity. They're not less aware of life's difficulties, they're just not enslaved by them. Philosophically, this mirrors the idea of detachment, but not in a passive or indifferent sense. It's not about withdrawal, it's about grounded awareness. A person whose soul is rising begins to operate from a deeper center, a place where their sense of identity is not rooted in outcomes, but in principles. They're no longer chasing what feels good, they're seeking what is good. And that shift reorders everything. This doesn't mean they no longer feel fear, they do, but they stop letting fear make the decisions, and the result is something paradoxical, calm in the face of the unknown. It's not numbness, it's not apathy, it's wisdom. They're able to look chaos in the eye without falling apart because they've made peace with the fact that life is bigger than them, and that they are not here to control everything, but to respond faithfully to what they've been given. Spiritually, this is where we see the hand of something divine, because no human logic alone can produce this kind of peace. It's not self-manufactured. It's a result of surrendering the illusion of control and finding your identity in something unshakable. When you begin to feel peace, not because your circumstances are perfect, but because your soul is no longer resisting the truth of who you are and what you're here for, that's transformation. This is not just a feeling. It's a recalibration of the entire self, and it's not something that happens in a moment, it's a process. But once it begins, it's nearly impossible to go back, because once you've tasted peace that doesn't depend on performance or approval, you stop settling for anything less. When your soul finds peace in uncertainty, that's not weakness, that's power, another sign that your soul is rising, and this one is harder to accept than most, is that you begin to let go of what no longer serves you. That phrase might sound cliché, but it's not about trendy detachment or some hollow self-help mantra. It's about shedding layers of identity, belief, and attachment that once defined you, but have now become too small for who you're becoming. It's the psychological equivalent of molting, painful, messy, and absolutely necessary for growth. Now, this process is rarely pleasant. In fact, it's often accompanied by a feeling of grief or loss, even if what you're letting go of is toxic or limiting. That's because the human psyche clings to familiarity. We find comfort in what we know, even when what we know is breaking us down. It's part of our evolutionary wiring. Habit breeds a sense of safety. But here's the problem: the soul doesn't evolve through comfort. It evolves through truth, and truth, by its very nature, disrupts. It exposes what's no longer sustainable. It shines a light on what's false. From a psychological perspective, Carl Jung called this individuation. It's the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are by integrating the parts of yourself you've disowned or suppressed. That process almost always requires letting go of false identities, roles you've performed for approval, narratives you've believed to stay safe, and relationships you've clung to for validation. A rising soul can no longer tolerate inauthenticity, and it starts to reject everything that feels performative, shallow, or misaligned, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity, because staying in those patterns starts to feel like spiritual suffocation. Philosophically, this mirrors a kind of existential integrity. When your soul is rising, you can no longer lie to yourself about what you want, who you are, or what's holding you back. The lies become too heavy. The dissonance becomes unbearable, and what's worse, if you ignore the call to release these things, you begin to decay from the inside. That's not poetic language, that's psychological fact. Suppression breeds bitterness. Avoidance breeds anxiety, and eventually the cost of holding on becomes greater than the fear of letting go. But make no mistake, this shedding is not about reckless abandonment. It's not about burning bridges just to feel powerful. It's about discernment. It's about recognizing what is no longer contributing to your becoming and having the courage to walk away from it. Sometimes that means ending relationships. Sometimes it means shifting careers. Sometimes it's as subtle and as profound as changing the way you speak to yourself. And yes, it will feel like death at first, but every ending has a shadow of beginning underneath it. You're not just letting go, you're making space. Space for the next version of you to emerge, for truth to take root, for God to move freely in areas you once kept locked. The soul cannot rise if it's chained to what it has outgrown, so if you feel something falling away, don't resist it too quickly. It might just be the weight you were never meant to carry. Modern culture is obsessed with comfort. We're constantly encouraged to avoid discomfort at all costs and chase experiences that make us feel good right now. That's the dopamine economy: immediate gratification, short-term highs, perpetual distraction. But what people rarely realize is that this pursuit of pleasure often masks a deeper existential void. You can be surrounded by stimulation, entertainment, food, sex, attention, and still feel completely empty. That emptiness isn't a flaw, it's a signal. It's your soul telling you that you were designed for more than consumption. You were designed for contribution, for impact, for meaning. Psychologically, this shift is tied to a reordering of priorities. Abraham Maslow, in his hierarchy of needs, suggested that after basic survival and security are met, the human being begins to seek self-actualization. That's the pursuit of purpose, authenticity, inner alignment. And when your soul is rising, that drive towards self-actualization intensifies. Suddenly, you're no longer asking, "What makes me feel good?" You're asking, "What am I here to do?" You start to measure your days not by how much you indulged, but by how much you grew. And that changes everything, from how you spend your time to who you surround yourself with. Philosophically, this echoes the classical idea that the good life isn't the pleasurable life, but the virtuous one. The Greeks spoke of eudaimonia, a kind of flourishing that comes from living in accordance with your highest values, your deeper nature, your divine calling. That kind of life requires effort, discipline, sacrifice, but it also yields a much deeper kind of joy, one that can't be bought, faked, or manufactured. And here's the paradox: when you choose purpose over pleasure, your life becomes more pleasurable in the long run. Not because you're chasing highs, but because you're living in alignment. You wake up with direction, you go to bed with peace, and the pleasures you do experience, whether it's rest, intimacy, or celebration, are richer because they're earned, not stolen from obligation. This shift doesn't make you boring, it makes you focused. You start to say no to what is easy so you can say yes to what is essential. You begin to recognize the cost of meaningless indulgence, not in money, but in time, energy, and integrity. You realize that every yes to distraction is a no to destiny, and so the craving for purpose isn't a phase, it's a call, one that your soul will keep whispering until you finally stop running and start building something eternal. Because at the end of the day, pleasure fades, but purpose fulfills. Another powerful indicator that your soul is rising is that you begin to notice patterns, divine patterns, in what once seemed random. You stop living by coincidence and start perceiving providence. It's as if life is speaking to you through circumstances, through people, through timing. And while the skeptic might dismiss this as wishful thinking or confirmation bias, the rising soul knows better. Because this isn't superstition, it's recognition. Recognition that the world is not just mechanical but meaningful. At a psychological level, what's happening here is a shift in your perception. Carl Jung called it synchronicity, the experience of meaningful coincidences that are not causally connected, but deeply significant to the individual. These moments tend to occur when a person is in transition, in crisis, or on the verge of transformation. The more attuned you become to your inner life, your thoughts, your values, your purpose, the more attuned you become to your outer world. Suddenly, your environment feels like a mirror. It reflects back your internal state. And if you're honest with yourself, you start to see that the universe is not silent. It's responding. This is not about magical thinking or forcing meaning where none exists. It's about training your consciousness to become alert to the subtle intelligence woven into reality. The soul, when it is rising, moves beyond surface-level interpretation. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift in question reveals maturity. It signals that you're no longer approaching life as a victim of chaos, but as a participant in something sacred. Philosophically, this parallels the idea that reality is structured with logos, order, reason, meaning. Ancient thinkers believed the universe had a moral and spiritual architecture, and when your soul starts to rise, you begin to perceive that architecture, not abstractly, but intimately. You see that some events are not just events, they are invitations. Invitations to grow, to realign, to return to yourself, to return to God. And here's where it becomes deeply personal. When your soul is rising, the patterns that emerge often point you toward your calling. Certain themes begin to repeat in your life, certain doors keep opening, certain truths won't leave you alone. It's not a formula, but it's a signal. Your life starts to form a language that only you can fully understand because it's tailored to your specific path. And if you ignore it, if you dismiss it as random, you risk missing the very guidance you've been praying for. What this means, practically, is that attention becomes a sacred act. You begin to treat your life like it matters, because it does. You journal, you reflect, you listen. You begin to take note of the patterns that stir something in you, and you follow them not blindly but faithfully, because when your soul is rising, you don't need all the answers. You just need to trust the next step. The chaos doesn't disappear, but your ability to navigate it changes, because when you start to see meaning where others see chance, your path stops feeling accidental and starts feeling designed.